Lance Johnson has a decade of experience working as a freelance video editor. Based in New York City, he delivers work to clients like Tom Ford, MTV, and Showtime. He is also the founder and host of the podcast See Through. Lance has an incurable eye disease called retinitis pigmentosa, which typically causes legal blindness by age 40. Today, at 34 years old, Lance has already spent 5 years having transparent conversations with people living with blindness and other disabilities as a way of exploring his own inevitable future. His whole outlook can probably be summed up in this way. There's something kind of exciting about the possibility that I'll have to just completely pivot and do something else. Here's my conversation with Lance. Thank you so much, Lance. I'm really glad that you had a chance to meet with me today. I thought you just did video editing because when I saw your profile on Instagram, I saw that, but I didn't realize how many other things you do.
Yeah, as you just mentioned, I'm a video editor. That's kind of my job title. That's how I pay my bills. And I became a video editor kind of by proxy, just by accident, by being a creative person and just wanting to make things. And in order to make videos or films, even now podcasting, editing's kind of part of the process. And through making things, basically, I've learned to edit and have been able to, I guess, be good enough at it to make a living off of it. But yeah, I never set out to be a video editor. It just kind of happened by accident.
That's your day job. So that's the thing that you do to make money, to earn a living. But you do a lot of other projects outside of that. So maybe talk a little bit about that and how you manage that balance, that push and pull between making a living through your day job and giving yourself the time and energy to explore other things that interest you.
Yeah, I also have a podcast. It's called the See Through Podcast. And I'm going on 5 years with this podcast now. And I do that completely on the side. I don't make any money off of it. It's very hard to make money off of podcasting. It's a passion project of mine. And it's called the See Through Podcast because, kind of like your podcast, I have what I call transparent conversations with my guest, where it's open and real talk. And it's centered around blindness and disabilities because I have an eye condition myself called retinitis pigmentosa, RP for short. And basically, RP, to simplify it, is like my peripheral vision is going away, kind of slowly closing in, from the outside in. And eventually my vision will be like looking through like a straw. Right now, I have a reduced field of vision. I've probably lost half of my peripheral vision. So I'm kind of working with like a reduced field of vision, and it's a degenerative eye condition. So it's only going to get worse over time. And with that comes a lot of thoughts because you're like, it's kind of strange to kind of know you're going to lose your vision. You just don't know when and how long it's going to take and how much vision you'll retain. There's chances of becoming completely blind. I inherited this condition from my mom, and she's what's considered legally blind. That's just legally blind is just a fancy way for the government to basically confirm that you have a visual impairment. You have to meet a certain criteria. And what that is when you have 20 degrees or less of vision, you're considered legally blind. So in terms of like your field of vision and how much peripheral vision you have, if you have 20 degrees or less, you're considered legally blind, and you can like get certain benefits, potentially like SSI or SSDI from the government. It's just a way for them to classify it. But my mom has about 6 degrees of vision. So again, it's like looking through that straw. And I grew up seeing my mom's vision digress, knowing I had this eye condition. And I'm explaining all this because it's why I do the podcast, and it helps me in my life, helps me in my creativity. And it also forces me to be vulnerable about it with my podcast because it's kind of a dark cloud hanging over your head when you know you're going to lose your vision and your way of living is through like a visual field, like a video editing. So you can kind of psych yourself out. You can be like, when am I going to lose my vision? What's the point of me being a video editor? How long am I going to be a video editor for? And those types of things. You can kind of have moments of panic if you really think about it hard. And I wanted to have discussions with people who are living with blindness already. I've interviewed people who are like me, newly diagnosed and kind of in the beginning phases. And then I've interviewed people who are completely blind. And then I've also interviewed people who have other disabilities like cerebral palsy, because I noticed that there's like a common thread of mental adaptation. You know, there's like physical adaptations where you like learn to use a white cane and like assistive technology. But then there's also like the mental adaptation. You have to be mentally tough, and you kind of have to change with the times because you might have a dip in your vision and you thought you were okay with it. But then when that dip of vision happens, you have to readjust constantly to your changes in your vision. So I started a podcast to kind of have these discussions with other people who are further along their journey and learn from them. And the only way that I'm actually going to learn from them is if I'm actually open and vulnerable, and they're all actually open and vulnerable to me. And we cover a lot of things, you know, the successes and the amazing, wonderful ways blind and disabled people have adapted and what they've accomplished, but also the reality of things where, hey, we can't drive anymore. You know, what comes along with that? What comes along with that with keeping a romantic relationship alive or meeting the right person or, you know, not falling into depression and things like that. So that's kind of where the podcast has come from. And luckily, like my video editing talents, I guess, helps with podcasting because I already have like a natural knowledge of editing interviews and working with audio. So it was kind of like a natural, seamless transition to get into podcasting. Plus, I love podcasts too. I still feel like I'm pretending to be a podcaster, even though I've been doing it 5 years. But so, yeah, I kind of had this natural inclination to want to podcast, and I chose that as my topic, and that's why.
I do have a sort of a selfish or a self-relatable question for you, which is that because your podcast, you're asking them questions that might make them feel vulnerable. What are the things that you do when you're inviting people you don't know to encourage them to come on a podcast where they're going to be revealing things about themselves that may be difficult to share?
Kind of like how me and you, we never met and talked before. And that's how it is with all my guests. There's certain guests that I have become friends with, and they've been on my podcast multiple times. So there's that sort of familiarity. But like 99% of the time, it's just like me and you. We're meeting for the first time. And then I'm trying to have, like I said, a transparent conversation. And it requires kind of nosy questions, you know? You kind of have to be a little nosy. And to be honest, as someone who doesn't really love small talk, I love the conversations I'm able to have with podcasting. Podcasting is kind of just an excuse to have a deep conversation with somebody. Like if I were to meet, like there's a difference between if I'm meeting somebody for like a coffee and getting to know them. I'm going to ask them different questions. I'm going to be like, what you been up to? What do you like to do for fun? Or, you know, but on a podcast, it's like, all right, let's introduce yourself. Let me hear about your disability. And then now they're like talking to me about something that they've grown up with or have been dealing with and have all these experiences with and sometimes traumas with. And then I have to ask like questions that are just kind of just straightforward, like, how does it feel? You know, and people who are, you know, paralyzed, I'll have to ask them, does it make you sad that you're not going to be able to walk again? Like, how do you wrap your mind around that? You just kind of have to ask the questions that most people would be too scared to ask, to be polite. And you kind of have to be impolite to get the real answers that people are going to be able to hear and relate to it. Because if I just have surface level conversations on the podcast, it's going to be very, very boring. So as a host, you kind of have to walk that tightrope of keeping it respectful, but also being like, hey, but let's just get to the point here.
Yeah, so I'm going to have to ask the really obvious nosy question now then, because I was going to wait a little bit longer, but I'm going
Yeah.
to ask it. The fact that you make a living as a video editor and you know that you're losing your vision and don't necessarily know how long it's going to take. What are your thoughts around what life might look like in the future if you're no longer able to edit video for a living?
It's a great question. And that's something that I honestly do not know the answer to. And that could be a fault of mine for being kind of intentionally not thinking about it, which I definitely do. I definitely have those thoughts and then just kind of be like, let's think about something else and turn the channel in my brain to something different. But, to back up a little bit, it's like I used to work behind the camera too. Like when I first started my career, I was kind of like a video editor, videographer, video producer kind of hybrid where I would set up shoots, I would shoot it, I would record audio, I would do the lighting, and then I would edit it. And I would work for like small marketing companies or ad agencies. And then when I moved to New York City, I moved to New York for two reasons. I can't drive anymore. So I wanted to use public transit. And the second is there's just strictly video editing work here. You don't have to be, I mean, you can do it all here if you want to, but you can also just be a video editor here. But in North Carolina, where I'm from, you kind of have to wear all these hats because video production jobs just are not as common in North Carolina as they are in New York City. So I kind of purposely made the switch from being behind the camera to just editing because with RP, most likely I'll be able to retain some central vision. So I'm like, all right, now I can control that. Now that I'm a video editor, as long as I can still see my screen, I should still be able to edit. I know keyboard shortcuts. I enlarge my cursor on my screen. It's very big and I have like a lime green border and I have everything in dark mode where I want, black backgrounds with white text just because it's easier for me to see. And then there's also things called screen readers, which you can get as your vision decreases, which will like read text to you. So I'm just kind of winging it as my vision declines. I'm just going to adapt as I go and hopefully be able to make it through a career. And if I ever just hit a brick wall, that's when I guess I'll have to figure something else out. And not to sound wild or whatever, but there's also something kind of exciting about the possibility that I'll have to just completely pivot and do something else, and what that would even be. And that's kind of exciting to me too. It's like, well, what would that next pivot be? It could be something I enjoy maybe more. I don't want to just tell myself that I can only be happy as a video editor and my skill set is only good for video editing. Like if you look at my resume, you would think that. I think about that too. I'm like, well, what else can I do? Because that's all I've done. But I don't know. I just try to take it a day at a time. And that's why I do the podcast, have conversations with people, learn the limitations that I'll possibly face and try to get ahead of those adaptations before I need to. And then hopefully I'll be able to just continue on this path. That's my honest answer. I know. I don't know if that's what you wanted.
That was, no, you have a remarkable kind of realistic equanimity about you. Your ability to accept, because it sounds like you have acceptance of your current context and the future is quite unknown.
It is something that I try to pride myself on. And there's better days than others. There's some days where you talk to me on a different day, I might have a different answer for you. But when it comes to acceptance, that didn't just happen naturally. That took a lot of work. It took a lot of work. Time podcasting and also time not podcasting. Just what I think about in the shower. when I'm out on a walk or, on the subway or, just have a thought pop in your mind and you try to explore it. And, there's a quote, the quote I like is, the only thing that doesn't change is change. And there's another simple quote is nothing changes if nothing changes. So I kind of love these like real simple quotes and they keep me grounded. But yeah, I had to put in the work. Like I had to have 5 years of conversations with people. And whereas before I did the podcast, I knew I had this eye condition, but I just buried it deep into my psyche and didn't think about it. And I've learned that exposure therapy, just forcing yourself to learn about whatever's troubling you, if you avoid it, it's going to retain that level of anxiety that you feel about it. But if you just dive into it as like a subject matter, if you're like researching a topic, and the more and more you learn about it, the less you're going to figure out and find out about it that's going to startle you. You're going to be like, well, I already knew that. Now you're starting to rationalize what you know about it. And there's not this kind of fear of the unknown anymore. And the only way you can kind of unlock that and get rid of that fear of the unknown is to become knowledgeable about it. So for a lot of people out there, if something's like hanging over your head or whatever it is, I would just advocate for look into it, research, learn about it. If it's something's really concerning to you, just Google it. And unless it's like something like a medical that you're like a hypochondriac, which I am, and you're like have something on your toe or whatever, and you Google that, that might not be smart. You might have a panic then. But yeah, with something that is not going away, like for certain, like a eye condition, don't be afraid to just dive into that subject matter. Talk to people who have it, the same condition as you, and hear how they're doing. Because once you talk to someone who's completely blind from the same condition as you, and you hear that they have a fulfilling life and a career and a wife and a family, and you're kind of like, oh, okay, because that's the worst case scenario. And your worst case scenario is being fully blind, but there's tons of people who are fully blind who are doing great. There's people who are fully blind who are not doing great too, but there's also plenty of people who are doing great. So you kind of have to look into that and figure that out for yourself and figure out what your worst case scenario is. And all of a sudden your worst case scenario isn't that scary anymore.
I'm pretty impressed, Lance. I think that's pretty cool. I don't know if you feel like you're that far past where most people are in their ability to deal with difficult situations in their lives, but I think you are. I think that's pretty incredible.
Well, thank you. And you know what? Life is going to life. Life is going to life. I'm going to probably face way more difficult challenges than vision loss in my life. So to assume that vision loss is going to be my number one obstacle is kind of presumptuous and kind of cocky. I hope it is the biggest problem in my life. I hope my RP is the biggest problem I have to deal with. And I'm not immune to other problems either. Just because I have an eye condition doesn't mean I can get, another medical condition or get ran over by a car, crossing the street, or get a divorce, or, have family members pass. It's like, if you think like that, and now I'm talking out of my butt because I definitely have anxiety about a lot of things, but, I should take my own advice and just say, like, if you think about what could go wrong constantly, it doesn't really prevent anything from actually happening.
If you're sort of broadening the context and saying, look beyond, don't focus it. Spend the time to sit with and research maybe a known thing that's coming up.
Yeah.
But also take a step back and make sure you're keeping perspective on the picture of all of life, 99.9%, which is unknown, completely unknown and uncontrollable.
Well, it's like that serenity prayer that they use in like Alcoholics Anonymous, where it's like to accept the things you can't change, have the courage to change things, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's one of my all-time favorites because it's like, there's certain things you can do and there's certain things you can't, and knowing the difference is a huge deal.
Okay, so let me just take that as an opportunity to step back also in the scope of the work that we're looking at in terms of what you do. So you have the video editing work, you have the podcast, you do music also. We haven't talked about that. Film shorts, all kinds of things. Where do you see sort of the common thread across who Lance is? If you sort of look across the body of work so far, like what have you revealed about yourself as a person through that work?
I think that I've just discovered that kind of like going back to how I first answered it about how I became a video editor by accident is I just like to create, and I've always had side quests, like the podcast, or I've made a short film outside of my time at work. I've recorded music just for fun I've always just wanted to do stuff. I'm interested in art and music, and I like consuming it, but not just consuming it, I want to create it. I kind of want to do both. And I've learned that I'm not like some people would categorize themselves like, oh, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a musician, I'm a podcaster, I'm a video editor. Video editing is what I've been most successful at. It's probably what I'm best at creatively. I've been able to make a life out of it, but I don't consider myself a video editor. I don't consider myself a filmmaker or a podcaster. I think I just consider myself just like a creative person who just wants to make things and get to know myself through making things. Like I feel like I get to know myself and learn more about myself when I'm creating. And I like expressing myself. I have a lot of internal conversations I have with myself, and I like to be able to put that out there and maybe share some insight into who I am through what I do. Maybe I like my work to speak for who I am more than just speaking of who I am. Podcasting changed that a lot because it's more direct, like this conversation. But before podcasting, it was just my short film idea. I want it to reflect me. I want my music lyrics to reflect me. And I think I have something to say, and just making things is how I say it. So, yeah, I'd say the common thread is just self-expression and creating.
Interesting. Okay, perfect. What's behind that question is that I do different things, but I'm constantly plagued by this question of, but why, or what's the reason I do this, this, and this, and I often can't find a common thread, and I'm disturbed by that. And so you could also have said back to me, I don't think about that. It's not important to me. And I think in a way that's sort of what you said. It's just these are all these different means for me to express myself. And you don't have to think too hard about, am I a video editor primarily, or am I a musician, or am I a filmmaker? You're Lance, and you're expressing Lance through all these different forms.
Yeah, it shouldn't be your personality. You shouldn't be like, I'm a video editor, so I have to dress this way. I have to go to these types of coffee shops. I have to drink these types of drinks, or you don't have to be a caricature of who you think you are. And also, what I'll say is, without trying things, you're not going to know if you like them. So sometimes, like with music, for example, I had zero success with music. I recorded a EP in Nashville that I just paid for out of my pocket, and nothing came out of it. But you know what? That's okay, because I had the life experience. I get to know that, like, I went to Nashville, I recorded an EP, I put it out, I played some open mics. I kind of know what it feels like to play live, and I got to check that box off. But a lot of people get too stuck in like the fear mode of how they're going to be perceived. I'm sure people clowned me. I'm sure people would listen to my music and probably made fun of it, or think it's silly that I even have a podcast, or do things that I do. They're probably like, huh, so there's probably better ways to spend your time. And that's their opinion, and that's fine. But you kind of have to try things and get things out of your system, is what I'm saying, to be able to move on to the next thing. And I don't think it ever ends. I think it's constant. I think you're going to be in your 70s being like, well, what is my new thing now? And I don't think it ever ends. I think it's just you keep moving. The point is you got to keep moving. It's kind of like the grow or die kind of quote, and sometimes you have to fail to just find the new thing that you might succeed at. Or what you don't want to do is not do something out of fear or fear of judgment. And then when you're in your 70s, you are mad at yourself that you didn't try certain things. And I just try to avoid that fear. I just try to dip my toes in as much as I can so I can get as much out of my system as I possibly can so I can feel proud of myself. Like, hey, I'm actually trying. I may not succeed or be the most successful person, but hey, at least I'm trying. I think that's like the bare minimum I can ask of myself is to actually try. And I think you should be proud of that if you're trying.
Well, and challenge what we call success, right? Whatever you
Yeah.
thought of your album, whether it was successful or not. The fact that you went to Nashville and made an album is in the top 5 coolest things I've heard on this podcast. I
Yeah.
just think that's super, super cool. What a great thing to do, to take that initiative and just say, I'm not just going to play in my basement. I'm going to Nashville.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Well, and it's also like everything can be thinking about in like terms of like ROI and what's your return on your investment. Like I've made short films where I've negative money. Podcast, I've probably a tiny bit of a net positive of money. Music, net negative. I'm just paying for stuff out of my pocket. But it's fine because everyone has hobbies. Think about how much money people spend on golf. But that's okay. But I'm not allowed to go record music.
I feel so much better about myself right now, Lance. You have no idea.
I'm not allowed to go make music. I'm not allowed to have a podcast. I'm not allowed to make a short film, but other people get to go golfing every weekend. Like that doesn't make sense. Like you can spend your money how you want to spend your money and it's what you get out of it. And if you're doing it if you're doing it for like to be cool or you're doing it to get attention, then that's when I would say like maybe rethink why you're doing it. But if you're doing it from a sense of purity and it's a pure form of like self-expression and self-exploration, then do it. Give it a shot. Spend some money. It's fine. Everyone has different hobbies. You don't need to feel this pressure to be the next, big thing or whatever it is. You just kind of have to explore it and then see what comes from it and see what you learn about yourself in the process and just grow or die.
You can find out more about Lance's work in video editing through his website, lancekestreljohnson.com, and on Instagram at lancekestrel. Also be sure to check out his podcast, See Through, for insight and inspiration at seethroughpod.com.